It's our first homework on radicals. And I already have all the solutions right here. The first part was just writing down the perfect square numbers. 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 2, 3 times 3 is 9, 4 times 4 is 16. And they go all the way up to 15 squared and 16 squared. It's good to use a calculator on those. That way, when you simplify, it becomes easier to actually break it down. So I have all the answers here. If you want, go ahead and pause the video so you could check your answers when you watch this at home. But you have all these answers. I forgot to box in number 24. The answer is 30. But we have all these answers. Now there are some that have the I involved, and that's really weird. I'm going to try to explain that later on. But right now, let me actually jump into this worksheet and get you started. So once again, I have the perfect square numbers list up here to help you out. So I have the perfect square numbers up there in red to help us simplify. But before we do that, let me explain something that's kind of weird that we didn't talk about in class. And that would be the square root of a negative number. Okay. Now, let me ask you this. What's the square root of 9? You guys already know that the square root of 9 is what? 3. 3. Now, if I asked you why is the square root of 9 3? Because 3 squared is 9, right? 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times itself is 9. That's why the answer is 3. What's the square root of 25? 5, because 5 times itself is 25, right? So when I say the square root, we know it's the opposite of the square. So I'm really saying what number times itself will give you that number on the inside. So what number times itself will give you 4? 2. You guys understand that. You guys are pros at that. But, Vanessa, what if I said the square root of negative 9? Then the answer is not 3, and the answer is not negative 3. Because when you think about it, what number times itself will give you this inside answer? It doesn't work. There is no such number. Because 3 squared is 9, and negative 3 times itself is also 9. There is no number that you could multiply with itself that'll give you a negative. Does that make sense? So this is where it gets really weird. Check this out. The answer to that one's actually 3i. What the heck? I means imaginary. Okay, there is no real number. There is no real number that if you multiply it with itself gives you a negative 9. There is no real number. Okay? In Algebra 2, you're going to get real in-depth into imaginary numbers, complex numbers. But right now, we're just going to say, and this is what I want everybody to write down. Let me delete this right here. This is what I want everybody to write down. What I want you to write down is this, guys. The square root of negative 1 is equal to I. This is a fact that we all need to learn at some point. Either today or tomorrow or the next day, but you need to know that you can't do the square root of a negative number. It ends up being imaginary. Okay?
Any negative number.
So any negative number is just you're gonna have an I on it. Okay, now so for example, let's say the square root of negative 25. Now this is the work that you should do. You should say, I'm gonna rewrite this as negative 1 times 25, and then I'm gonna split the square root, right? And we know that the square root of negative 1 is I, so this is really I times the square root of 25. What's the square root of 25? 5. So you really have I times 5. That's like saying x times 5. So you're just going to rewrite it as 5i. Pretty easy. How about the square root of negative 81? Just the answer. 9i. See? It's not bad. The square root of negative 16? 4i. It's an imaginary number. It's not real. It's imaginary. Okay? I know that's something really weird. But anytime you take the square root of a negative, it's technically imaginary. Now, of course, you could get some ugly ones that are not perfect square numbers. Like let's say you had the square root of negative 20. Then you're supposed to break it up with multiplication to get a perfect square number. So you would have negative 1, that'll be the I, and then times the square root of 4 times the square root of 5. You guys remember that? So this is not a perfect square number. This is a perfect square number. 20 was rewritten as 4 times 5. Now we have a perfect square number that we could actually do. Now this square root of negative 1, what is this really? I. Square root of negative 1 is just I. So you really have I times 2 times the square root of 5. So what's I times 2? 2I.
So it's 2I.
Square root of 5. And that's as ugly as it gets. I mean, no, I'm lying. It could get uglier, but for the most part, that's it. Any negative number, you're going to have to make it an I. And then you just simplify the way you normally would. So this negative is just going to be an I. And the square root of 20, just break it down to 4 and 5. The square root of 4 is 2. Square root of 5 comes down. The 2's out here, but the I is with it. So 2I, and then square root of 5 is on the inside. Make sense? So now that we understand I, we will be able to answer some questions that have negatives on the inside. So like number 2, that does not have a negative on the inside. So what are we going to do here? We're just going to do the square root of 81. What's the square root of 81?
9.
That's 9. And what about the negative sign in the front? Just bring it down. So your answer is negative 9. Piece of cake. There was no I right there. There's no I right there. Right? Okay. But let me see. Let's go to, is there an I in there? Nope. That's not an I either, right? The square root of 1, that's just 1 with the negative in front. So your answer is negative 1. Piece of cake. Let's see, where's one where, okay, here we go. Number 8. Or number 5. Number 5. Number 5. That negative is on the inside. So you are going to do, that's going to be an I. So you could just do this. You could say I and then rewrite it, square root of 4. So what I did right there was take the negative out and make it an I. It's that simple. And then what's the square root of 4? 2. So you really have I times 2. 2I. See, imaginaries are not that bad. Okay. We also had another negative one. We're at right here, number 8. Now, thank goodness we actually did the perfect square numbers above, because right here you could see that 196 is really 14 squared. Right? So what's the answer right here to negative 196? What's the answer right there? Negative 196. The square root of negative 196. It's going to be 14i. Yeah? Okay. So those are pretty easy. And we also have the old school type of numbers or radicals that we were working on in class, like the square root of 40. This is not a perfect square number. It would be nice if it were like the square root of 49. The answer would be 7 and that's it. But right here it's 40. So you want to break it down with multiplication so you could get a perfect square number. Esteban? What would you break down 40 to? 20 times 2? No way, because 20 is not a perfect square. 2 is not a perfect square. Give me a perfect square number that I could use. 5 times 8? 5 times 8? Is 5 a perfect square? No. Is 8 a perfect square? No. So that's not really good. 4 times 10. 4 times 10. Yeah. So let's actually do that. Let's go 4 times 10, and let's rewrite that square root by splitting it to each of them. And what's the square root of 4? 2. And what's the square root of 10? You just leave it. Now, some of us are thinking, oh, 10. I could break that down to 5 times 2. Does that help you? No, it doesn't, because 5's not a perfect square, 2's not a perfect square, so that's pointless. Don't do that. Your answer is 2 square root of 10. How about number 10? Is 54 a perfect square number? No, it's not. So you don't have a perfect square number right there. You want to rewrite it with multiplication to get a perfect square number. So what would you rewrite it as? What would you rewrite it as? 9 times 6, because 9 times 6 is 54. So if you rewrite it as 9 times 6 and you actually split the root, that'll give you 3 square root of 6. And the square root of 6, you cannot break it down further. Right? 4 times something, it won't give you 6. So that's it. That's as far as you could simplify it. That is your answer. Make sense? So I don't want to do every single question on this. You guys could do it. Let's do a couple more, though. How about 7? Okay, number 7. 7's fun. Why is 7 fun? Because you have a nice number out here. Now remember, it says -4 times the square root of 64. Do you know what the square root of 64 is? It's 8.
Oh, yeah.
64 is a perfect square number. Check it out. Check it out. Look it up here. Look up here. Where is it at? There it is. 8 square root of 64.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So I know that right here, -4 times 64, that's really -4 times what? 8. No more square roots, just nice, beautiful numbers. -4 times 8. What's -4 times 8? -32. Make sure you use a calculator if you're confused with the multiplication. Is there any other one you'd like to see? 18? How about before 18? How about like 75? Is that easy or hard to do? What are you going to rewrite that as? 25 is a perfect square number. So 25 times 3, it's like 3/4 is 75 cents. And when you split them, since 25 is a perfect square number, you get a nice, beautiful answer. 5. You bring down the square root of 3, you're done. 98. How about that one, number 13? 98. I don't even know. Does anybody know what we could break that down to? Maybe 4 times something? Maybe 9 times something?
48 times 2. Oh, wait.
49 times 2.
Oh, yeah.
Remember, you want to use the biggest perfect square number possible. So if you do go for the 49 times 2, that's 98. And when you split them, the square root of 49, 7, and the square root of 2 just stays the square root of 2. Okay, now somebody asked about 18. We have the negative sign out in the front, right? So I'm just going to bring that negative sign down in front of my answer. There's my negative sign right there. Now, notice that there's a negative sign inside the root. What does that mean? What kind of answer are we going to have? Imaginary. Remember, the square root of a negative number is imaginary, right? So this right here, just focusing on the square root of -49, that answer is what? 7i. That's actually 7i. And don't forget about the negative that's in front, so it's -7i, your final answer. I know this I is new. It's throwing some people off. We're going to keep working with it the whole week. This was not part of today's notes. It will be part of the next lesson. How about 16? 28 is not a perfect square number. Could I break it down to get a perfect square number?
Yeah.
What? See, 14 times 2, that doesn't help us. 4 times 7. 4 times 7, that does help us because when you split it, you're going to get 2, bring down the square root of 7, you're done. 2 square root of 7. Now, number 21, is that going to be imaginary? No. You have the square root of 4. What's square root of 4?
2.
And what about that negative in the front? Just bring it down.
-2.
-2 is your answer.
Look at that.
Number 22. What's the answer there?
The same thing as 2, right?
The answer is -10. Check it out, guys. This -2 is being multiplied with the square root of 25. So you're going to have -2 times, but what is the square root of 25? It's 5. So you really just have -10 as your answer. How about 23?
Can you do 24?
Wait, could you do 3?
How about 23?
24. That one's easy.
I have 8 in the front times the square root of 36. What could I break that down to? 6. And 8 times 6 is? 48. Okay, which one?
3.
Number 3.
24.
256. If you look at your list up here, 256 is really 16 squared. So the answer right there is just 16. Okay, somebody said 24? 24, fun stuff. I really have 5, let me write that down, times square root of 9. What's square root of 9? 3. And then times, and what's square root of 4? 2. Times 2. See, no more square roots. So what's 5 times 3?
15.
And what's 15 times 2?
30.
Any other ones?
You do 30.
30? Sure, why not? 30. We have negative 3 on the outside. Let me write that down. Negative 3 times, and now let me do the square root of 45. What could I rewrite the square root of 45 as? 45 is not a perfect square number. So what am I going to do? 9 times 5. And when I split the root, I will get 3 square root of 5. Now let's not forget about this negative 3 out in the front that I need to multiply. So I really have negative 3 times negative 3 times the square root of 5. So the final answer is negative 9 square root of 5.
Oh, and what about 20?
What about 20? Let's do 20 then. What's the square root of 0? 0. So this is just 0, and there's a negative sign. But what's negative 0? Still just 0. 0. Cerote entero. Nasty. Okay, so for right now, guys, I'm going to stop right there because we still need tomorrow's lesson to do the rest of this homework. So we'll do tomorrow's lesson, and then we'll go back and ask more questions on this worksheet.